סליחה, בדובר הבא, סליחה. נמשיך בדובר הבא, ביוגרפי, שידבר על ספרה החדש של רונית מרוז, ורונית תגיד לך על כך. בבקשה.
שלום לכולם, אני אומר לתלמידיי תמיד, לא להתחיל עם התנצלות, אבל אני מתחיל להתנצל. כשאני אתן את ההרצאה שלי באנגלית, כדי שאני לא אשבור את האוזניים שלכם עם העברית שלי. בראשית, in the beginning, Moshe wrote the book. This remarkable feat was hard to fathom, and yet based on the authority of those who promulgated that belief, it was accepted and became tradition. Later in history, a scholar came along and argued that in fact, Moshe was not the sole composer of this magnificent and important work, but rather multiple authors produced texts which came to be edited, comprising a whole work, a unity even, despite the diversity of its authors. In the case of one Moshe's work, it was Wellhausen and his theory of J, E, P, and D. While in the case of the other Moshe, it was the Havdil, Yehuda Liebes, and his theory of multiple authorship. In the next phase of critical authorship of the first Moshe's book was the addition of H to J, E, P, and D, and subsequently of the recognition that each one of the documents that purportedly make up Moshe Rabbeinu's work is intricately intertwined and engaged with the others, that is, intertextual and intratextual. And now, with the publication of Ronit Meroz's new book, we have a revised view of Moshe de Leon's work. Ronit has demonstrated how a handful of other named authors and the suggestion of many unnamed other authors have all contributed to the product that we know today as Zohar, a living mythical entity that morphs and shape-shifts with each new edition, commentary, translation, and academic study. In my translation on the Pritzker Zohar, volumes 11 and 12, Ronit was by my side at so many stages. Specifically for the Perush al Merkevet, Yechezkel, Sifrei Torah, Rav Yaakov Schatz, the story of the Met HaMitabel, Rav Yosef Angelet, Uktavav Zohariyim, all treating texts that I translated, with her scholarship nourishing my work. But her deep dive discoveries into the layering of the Zohar also impacted my thinking when constructing the Aramaic text, making decisions on the cellular level about the chronology of manuscripts and the selections among variants. For those moves, it was articles such as Der Aufbau des Buches Zohar in its Hebrew version, The Path of Silence, the archaeology of the Zohar, Zohar narratives and their adaptations, Vani Lo Hayiti Sham, and the Rekimato Shel Mitos, that kept me attentive to the subtle issues of formation and reformation, glosses and simplifications that occur within the Zoharic texts. More than anyone else, Ronit has taught us how to attend to the palimpsest-like qualities of the Zohar, to its rubbings and erasures, its additions and its smudges. Personally, she has been generous with her time and assistance, and I remember fondly one late night at AJS in a closed-for-the-night section of a hotel cafeteria as she patiently showed me her methodology for analyzing texts for hours. What Ronit has gifted us with this particular book is the compression of all of these insights into one space. Note that I did not say compact space. Just as the Zohar invites the readers to participate in its mystical homiletical project, Ronit says early on that this book represents first steps toward a continued archaeological endeavor to uncover the various layers that comprise the Zohar. Indeed, Ronit has shown us a way forward to identify different strata within it. She has demonstrated how it is possible to identify chronology between different texts and layers through intertextual references. Yet another important feature of her book is the identification of new units through careful delineation of characteristics that distinguish them from other sections of Zohar material. Two such units that she has discovered are one called Midrasho Shel Rabbi Yitzchak, its parameters discussed in her forthcoming book, Yovle Zohar, and another distinct unit, Vayhi Or, printed in Zohar 1:15a to 22a. My attention going forward today will be to the highlights of some of the chapters and themes that Ronit analyzes, followed by a number of questions that remain standing for me, where I'd like to push her to say a little bit more. First, in the Matnitin and Tosefta, which she collectively refers to as Mishnayot. Already in her foreword, Ronit claims that most of the section that she calls Mishnayot was written before the 1280s. She bases this claim on the fact that other sections of Zohar quote from it, even copying its style. This claim, on page 3, foreshadows the entire project, as the author proceeds to show how one passage after another builds upon each other, sometimes clarifying, sometimes simplifying, sometimes expanding upon, sometimes translating into Aramaic, but constantly ruminating about previous expressions, constantly reworking. While it is certainly the establishment of different units that preoccupies the book's attention, there are so many shimmering insights throughout the book, and I will draw attention to some of the most striking in this talk. In the Mishnayot, she draws attention to the euphony, Yigoniyut, of the Mishnayot, a musicality established largely through rhythm. Significantly, she notes that this rhythmic quality appears in only half of these passages, while in the others it is hardly present at all. On its face, this is an interesting observation, but what is striking about the discrepancy is that most of the rhythmic ones deal with the fate of the soul after death, while those without rhythm are interested in theological matters, particularly with a figure called Whitehead, but also specific references to Chokhmah and Binah. This leads her to conclude that some of the Mishnayot are proto-Kabbalistic and apparently uninfluenced by theosophy, while others manifest a certain awareness of Sfirot, observing that this demonstrates a theological development, or one might say at least theological variance, within this fairly small stratum. Most significantly, though, about this observation is how it underscores two forms of Matnitin, and thus of its multiple authorship. It is at that level of deep digging that yields the kind of ore that Ronit is seeking. Here is a previously unrecognized seam, that's S-E-A-M, that suggests different authorship. The book is chock full of these nuggets, and Ronit suggests humbly that there are no doubt many more such seams to be found. Indeed, in one of her many valuable indices, she's produced Maftechot. She has produced a whole list of other texts appearing throughout the Zohar that should also be included in a compendium of Mishnayot texts. Excuse me. Henri Corinne is a bio break. One example is the following from Zohar 1, Chelek Aleph 100a and b. While appearing under the title Sitrei Torah, and indeed that is where I located it in my translation in volume 11 of the Pritzker edition, and if only the principle of Mukdam, Ein Mukdam Muchar applied to the publication of my book and Ronit's book, then I could have done the appropriate replacing of it in one section rather than another. But in this particular section, now found in Sitrei Torah, print as in the standard edition, it is clearly a text that fits the criteria of the Mishnayot. Zohar, the Anhir la'Abi, Natzitz l'Kama Sitrim, Zohar Slik v'Nachit, Zohar Natzitz l'Chol Evar, Zohar Nagid v'Nafik, Zohar de la Pasik la'Almin, Zohar David Toldin. Its Matnitin style is quite evident. This is one of almost 30 such examples that show the way forward for further investigation of the textual units of Matnitin and Tosefta. Moving now to Sitrei Torah. Unique in style, mostly non-narrative, but rather exegetical, highly dualistic, with a strong focus on the demonic realm. These are the primary ingredients of Sitrei Torah, Ronit explains. This binary of holy and impure exist, of course, in the supernal realm, as we have just heard, but she pushes towards social applications, referring to both an interreligious struggle between Jews and Christians, as well as an intra-Jewish struggle between classes of Jews. These classes are defined along a scale of piety, leading Ronit to place Sitrei Torah squarely as part of the Tshuva movement of the 1280s. Professor Meroz argues that the fingerprints of Rabbi Yaakov Schatz, student of Ramdal, can be found in Sitrei Torah either as the author of many of its sections or at least as their editor. While other scholars may dispute the identity of Sitrei Torah's authorship, the cleverness of her approach is worth noting. By drawing attention to the historicity of questions and answers in Kabbalistic works of the time, and noting that opinions mentioned in Sitrei Torah correspond to stances that are rejected in De Leon's Sefer HaMishkal, a work dedicated to this very same Rav Yaakov, she lines up that parallel to suggest Rav Yaakov's contribution to the text. We now want to draw attention to two wonderful readings of Sitrei Torah texts. In the story of Migdal Bavel, Chelek Aleph 74b to 75a, a group of wicked ones tries to erect an Ir u'Migdal as parallels the existing structures of Ir u'Migdal with the intent to supplant them. This establishment of new institutions and buildings by one side to serve as a house of worship for a deity, the demonic side, imitating identical structures on the side of holiness, signifies in Ronit's reading nothing less than the formation, in her words, of a new religion. Ultimately, there is an attempt to use powers of holiness to enhance the powers of impurity, a distinctive feature of Sitrei Torah that calls for the presence